Now, a week after the local government registration weekend, most political parties are launching their manifestos this weekend. The past weekend's voter registration revealed that people between the age of 30 and 39 had the highest turnout, with close to 7 million registering. About 4.4 million people aged between 20 and 29 registered, while the number of people aged between 18 and 19 who registered was alarmingly low, with just over 175,000. What does it say about voter apathy among the youth? Are there parties that speak directly to the youth and their needs? And do municipal leaders impact the lives of the youth in any way? Joining us to discuss this and more, I'm joined by political analyst Mapaseka Muroa, social analyst Tessa Dooms, and youth activist Nkanyiso Ngqukula. Very good morning to you all. Thank you so much for speaking to us. Tessa, if I could start off with you, we're talking about those numbers, 175,000 of the teenagers, first-time potential voters, only that number registering. What is contributing to voter apathy amongst young people?
Yeah, I think it would be hard-pressed to say that this is a sign of voter apathy. We need to remember two things. Local government elections generally have lower voter turnouts. And so to expect that new voters would be enthused about local government elections as their first time voting is very unlikely. But the second thing is there's also been a lot of confusion around this election and the voter registration process, given all the court bids and, of course, the changing of dates. And so I think between those two factors, young people would not have had a lot of opportunity to be engaged very directly about voting and voting choices, about how the process of registration works. Many young people may not even realize at this stage why registration is required and may think they can just show up on the day. And that's a lack on our side as a society in terms of our civic education and our sense that when we think about young voters, we don't really think through the full spectrum of the experience that they've had with the electoral system and with democracy while they were teenagers. And so we don't really give as much attention to it as we should.
Now, Nkanyiso, you're an activist and obviously understand the process of advocacy. How much has been done and what else can be done in this process?
Well, I think that the youth in South Africa has been engaged into political activity, you know, to contribute to our democracy. But the issue, the conversations that we normally have are sort of bullying young people into voting without giving them a correct approach as to why is it important that they should participate in an election. I think oftentimes you hear that people get blackmailed, that your rights to vote, someone died for it. Yes, of course, but the youth apathy that is there, blackmailing them, actually it means different things that someone died for you to vote. Because to someone maybe who's Afrikaner and votes for AfriForum, when you tell them that someone died for them, for themselves to be able to vote, it could mean something different. So I think that for young people to participate in an election, obviously we know that due to issues socioeconomic issues that affect them directly, there's less desire to participate in mainstream politics, you know, of which what I would say it's sort of an empty ritual where you participate in a process that you know that is already rubber stamped or it favors a certain political groups. It really does not immenses your own interest as to what is it that you want to achieve when you participate in an election. However, youth in South Africa is, in fact, participating through social media, drafting of opinions, political activism in communities, social movements. In many different mediums, youth in South Africa is very engaged in politics, but just not into the mainstream politics. So I think that to encourage youth, in order for them to participate in an election, one, we must have a conversation that really triggers down into, you know, it really goes down into what is it that the youth wants. Obviously, there are issues of unemployment that disproportionately affect young people in the country. There are issues of access to higher education. There are so many issues in the country right now that mostly affect the youth. So I think the political class, they should, in fact, stop using, you know, this populist approach when they go to youth. I mean, they present themselves as alternatives or they present themselves as liberation movements. I think that conversation has long expired. We need to speak about our endeavors. We need to speak about the future of this country as how do we build this country along with young people. So I think that the conversation should be premised on that for to encourage the young people to be able to participate in an election.
Mapaseka, thanks for joining us. Now, your first point of contribution would be around how do we get the youth to realize the power that they have? Should they be waiting for political parties to come to them and say, this is the message, take it or leave it? Or is it a case of if the sufficient advocacy occurred and there was a realization amongst young people that they do have the power and they have the power in the numbers, how then do they engage themselves, or how do parties or organizations engage youth for them to realize that they do have power in numbers and that they can make a change without necessarily engagement from the political parties?
I think the first thing to note is the fact that it's one of the objects, constitutional objects of local government, to actually get communities to be involved in local government. It's a constitutional objective, which local government is not doing very great at the end of the day. I think young people do understand their power. Hence, they've taken to the streets with Fees Must Fall, Roads Must Fall, and other movements to show the kind of power that they have and the kind of influence they can have on politicians. I think the issue is particularly within the structure of politics itself, them getting involved as politicians, running as independents, having their own political parties, because to some extent we can say that political parties haven't really been able to communicate thoroughly and effectively to young people what it is that they need to communicate. And to some extent, young people do feel left out, but it's not that they're not engaged. It's not that they're not participating. They are. They're just choosing an alternative route versus going the political route that does exist. But I think that's something that they need to take advantage of. And if it means starting their own political parties, then they should do that. Absolutely.
Now, recently we picked up in the statistics that 16 to 29-year-olds accounted for 91% of the new voter registrations. And that's a huge number, 402,000 individuals registering to vote for the next time. Is this a realization? Is it about how difficult things are at the moment in the economy that young people have said, you know what, enough is enough, let us get up and let us vote into power those individuals or those parties that we feel will look after our needs, so to speak? Mapaseka?
Yes, absolutely. I think 100%. I think with that age group, there is a more political inclination. Yes, there is more political inclination, and there is an engagement that's going on there. I mean, when you think of a municipality like Lagos municipality, where the biggest employer in that local government chose the litigation route to then say, look, 40% of our production is being thwarted because there isn't service delivery. And so national government was then asked to then interfere in the affairs of that local government. That speaks to those young people, because they're the ones that are not being employed or losing employment as a result of a lack of service delivery. So then they don't have a choice but to take to the polls and vote for a government that they believe will work for them. And that'll be interesting, because particularly with opposition politicians, they're the ones who have to bring in new people to come and vote for them. It's more difficult to change the mind of the person who's already been voting since 1994 versus a new person who wasn't part of that political dispensation, to get them into vote and actually say, look, these are my policies and this is my track record if I have one. Like, for instance, the Democratic Alliance, and as well as the Economic Freedom Fighters, and the king playership that they have been able to contribute to in the metros like Tshwane and Johannesburg and Nelson Mandela Bay.
Tessa, let's talk about first-time voters again and their expectations. In fact, the expectations of young people going into November 1 polls. What are those expectations? And from what we've seen, is there a clear favourite in terms of this political party definitely addresses those needs?
Yeah, what young people are expecting as first-time voters is to experience this power of the vote that they've always heard about. They're hoping to do a few things. They're hoping to see candidates and political parties that they can engage with directly and that they can have a voice in influencing. Young people want to feel like their voice and their votes will make a difference and have a change in their society. But at this level, particularly, they want to be able to engage. Social media and even community mobilization and protest show that young people do want to address the issues. They do want to be part of the solution. They do want to feel like they have a role to play, and they're looking for political parties that will not only say, this is what I will do for you, but that will say, this is what we will do together. This is what we will do with you. This is the way that we will amplify the things that you are already doing in your community and can do better. And these are the ways that you can support government in the things that it does. We've seen across time that young people are notorious for being very committed in their local settings, to be volunteers in their communities, to lead things in their communities, to start things in their communities. And what they're looking for is a government that will support that, and a government that will do the basics right. I think the second layer for young people is the question about economic change in their own lives. And local economic development is one of the things that local governments have not done particularly well on, and they've not focused on in the ways that they could. And young people are involved in the economy at the very micro levels of the economy in very localized way. And so while national policies are starting to talk more about township and rural economies, local governments definitely need to use the power of local economic development financing to mobilize young people to see what they're doing, to support what they're doing, and particularly to look at micro and informal enterprises and support those so that young people feel like they know where they can go when they need support and when they're trying to do the things that will improve their economic futures.
Nkanyiso, so yesterday, one of my colleagues in Port Sutola had on the show a young man, 20 years old, that is running in the November 1st elections. How important is it for young people to get involved at this elementary stage, if you will? And would you, as young people, vote for another young person?
Oh, most definitely. And I think that it's a long overdue conversation. We really need to have more young people participating in our democracy. And I think that active citizenship means exactly that. It's just that it has not yet been clearly defined because of obviously our past. Our politics have often been dominated by older people and the ageism that exists, within the political space. However, due to the need and the vacuum, the need that more young people are needed into the space, because we really need to feel represented as young people within the political space. Because once we have a voice, we believe that we could have influence into policy, we could have influence into some political decisions that are taken at the upper structures of government and everywhere, even in the local government sphere. I think it's a very important sphere because it's in our communities, things young people that they see every day. It's things that, in their communities that they experience, So I think that the issue of participation had not yet been clearly defined because there are those young people who are actively involved within political parties. But we know that in their participation in those political parties, they are not all the time the decision makers. They are not all the time mostly contributing to the policies or the posture that political parties take. They are just there to add numbers, obviously for different reasons. One can say transformative exigencies and so forth. So I think there's also that other group of young people that does not belong to any political party. They are just voters. So, and I think that this line that I'm trying to draw is to demonstrate that young people, if they are united and participate in our democracy, so I think that increases the level of trust and it increases the level of how we view the local government sphere and how we view the national government and its operations in the country. Because, as we say, most young people are actively involved into activism in their communities. We've seen with FISMA's example has been made. We've seen other activities. Young people go into their communities, they attend community meetings. Young people have raised these issues. We've seen a lot of activism happening on social media, people using hashtags to voice out, their dissatisfaction with how government is being run and how local government issues are being addressed at the local government sphere. So obviously, in our communities, in our municipalities, there has been a lot of mismanagement, corporatization of government, and also all those issues that lead into young people not even having been able to access job at the municipality level because of nepotism and because of many other underlying issues. So their participation is in fact trying to demonstrate to other young people who are not into politics that, in fact, we can have the same young people, who can represent our interest and represent our politics, because we believe young people are the future, of this country.
Now, Tessa, you're a social analyst and also a woman. A year ago, when the government's GBV and Feminicide Command Centre was set up, a call centre to speak to GBV issues, more than 120,000 victims in the first 3 weeks of lockdown. I mean, that's an astronomical figure, whichever way you look at it. Is a political party that speaks to these issues of gender-based violence, issues of around women in particular, likely to get the woman vote or the youth vote?
Yeah, so, I mean, this is one of the biggest issues of our society, and I think even globally, we have a lot of latent gender-based violence that goes unchecked and unnoticed. And I think that the issue is beyond gender-based violence by itself. What we do need is political parties who have an ethos and understanding of the ways in which patriarchy and gender inequality across the board is a problem in our society and needs to be dealt with. And that's a systemic push. It's not a reaction just to gender-based violence by itself, but it's a question about how do we understand the way in which girls and boys are raised? How do we understand broader understandings of gender and sexuality so that we have a more inclusive society and a more inclusive understanding of people's lives, particularly those who come into a society and are ostracized because of their gender identities or sexual orientations. So there's a broad range of issues when it comes to gender inequality. That includes gender-based violence, but must not only be about gender-based violence. We need a societal reform, and I think political parties need to show that they understand these issues, and they need to have a mainstreamed approach to gender equality, one that goes across their policies, one that is reflective of the ways in which gender inequality is pervasive in our society and how they're going to actually address it in all spheres of society, not only in terms of criminal justice and ensuring that violence is decreased.
Tessa, Mapaseka and Nkanyiso, thank you so much for your time this morning. So I look forward to having more conversations over the next 5 weeks. There was political analyst Mapaseka Muroa, social analyst Tessa Dooms, and youth activist Nkanyiso Ngqukula.